Even before the coronavirus spread worldwide, data centers were emerging as a growth sector for investors. The construction management firm Turner Townsend has released the results of a poll of 162 data center professionals rather, about business conditions in 40 markets, including relative construction costs. The firm's vice president, Whitney Villalobos, joins us today to discuss that report. Welcome to the Weekly, Whitney.
Hi, John. Thanks for having me.
Whitney, let's start off, get a little context here. How long has Turner Townsend been polling data center professionals?
We're in our fourth year of publishing the Data Center Cost Index. So we've been polling data center professionals since 2017.
Mm-hmm. And I was interested to see that far more respondents in the latest poll feel the data center sector is recession-proof than a year ago. Why do you think that is now, and do you expect them to feel the same way once the coronavirus is under control?
I think the coronavirus has a lot to do with this line of thinking that the DC market is recession-proof. Many are associating the cause, which is the pandemic, with the recession itself, which is rightly so in this case. The data center sector, as we know, has fared extremely well for obvious reasons. Schools, businesses, individuals, all moving to online platforms during stay-at-home orders. So how a sector performs in a recession is simply supply and demand in terms of how the recession affects a particular industry. This recession is occurring at a unique point in time, and the data center sector has proved to be very resilient.
But your report also draws a big red circle around what you see as a fragile global supply chain. You know, what are its weakest links, and what are owner-operators doing to strengthen them?
The weakest links are similar to what we're seeing more broadly in the global market. In the past decade, there has been a reliance on often geographically distant countries for materials and equipment, and we have now seen how disruptive a global pandemic can be given this approach. And that is going to change scenario modeling and risk management for years to come. The question now is, how do you predict and navigate the various different approaches to the pandemic that countries in your supply chain are taking, as far as lockdowns and cross-border travel and restrictions when the next global event occurs? Mm-hmm. So regarding the data center sector itself and its supply chain, we know the sector needs to expand, but it is still very much a relationship-based sector that likes to work only with others who already have data center experience. And that has inhibited diversification, which would be needed to build a more reliant or resilient supply chain. Mm-hmm. As far as the owner-operators, in general, companies are doing serious reevaluations of their supply chain and starting to look at geo-diversification as well as supplier diversification for risk mitigation. Of course, even pre-pandemic, no two data center operators were taking the same approach to procurement.
Yeah.
But we do see an increasing trend of organizations looking at alternative delivery models, from construction management to integrated project delivery, IPD, and multi-party agreements.
Are any one of those predominating right now in your estimation?
Again, data center clients are so different and they take very unique and different approaches that we don't see necessarily one overarching trend. But again, given that we're now several months into the pandemic, I think a lot of options are being explored. Companies recently have been moving to modular approaches, building centrally and shipping completed modules to speed schedule, but arguably that could introduce higher risk depending on how diversified the approach is.
Yeah.
What we do know is there and will continue to be constant pressure on schedule and cost, which will be the overarching factors in decision making, whether in the short or long term. So when we talk supply chain, the main concern, of course, is lead times being extended. Those operators with size have the advantage of placing big orders, for example, 100 generators to get to the top of the ship list. Bulk buying power will continue to be a mitigation option for supply chain risk.
Mm-hmm. Your report identifies Europe as continuing to be the #1 data center market for investors and for operators too. How is that market changing, though? I was intrigued by some of the markets that you think are emerging.
One of the main ways the market has been changing in Europe in 2020 is we're seeing widespread investment outside the traditional markets of Frankfurt, London, Amsterdam, Paris, and Dublin. So developers and operators have really pushed forward this year with a much greater number of site acquisitions and projects kicking off in secondary markets like Warsaw, Madrid, Milan, Berlin, Zurich, and Copenhagen. Developers are competing aggressively to offer the best time to market to the hyperscale customers. And they're increasingly using services of build to suit developers to achieve more rapid expansion of their cloud.
Mhm. In the United States, Northern Virginia is ground zero for data centers, but the report seems to indicate that the other markets are coming into their own. Maybe you could talk a little bit about them as well.
Yeah, yes, of course, there is already and will continue to be investment beyond Northern Virginia as that market reaches practical saturation. Dallas, Silicon Valley, Phoenix, New York, New Jersey, Chicago will all be locations of growth and investment. And much like Europe, we're seeing some growth in the secondary markets as well, like Atlanta. Essentially, wherever the business case makes sense, in other words, proximity to low latency fiber networks, geographic stability, population centers, tax and other incentives, you will have the investment.
Mm-hmm. Is it a function of land availability, a function of what's driving the secondary markets recent popularity?
It's essentially all those factors combined. As the fiber networks become more available, as land is available, and again, as population centers where the demand exist, they will grow.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And what do you believe is going to be the biggest trend that's going to affect data center demand going forward?
That's a good question. I believe edge computing is one of the biggest and will transform the data center industry. The edge, of course, is bringing the computing power to the point of use, which frees up bandwidth, enhances security, reduces latency. A lot of data storage and processing does not actually need to be in the cloud, and in fact, it is typically expensive to store it there. So rather, it can remain at the edge, at the transactional point, and only send to the cloud what is needed. So technology in general is moving in that direction. So we'll start to see an explosion of edge data centers. Hyperscale data centers will still be prevalent and needed, but the edge is very exciting as far as its transformative effects.
Mm-hmm. A good chunk of your report focuses on the relative cost of construction in different markets. And without going into granular detail about which market it's specifically, what in general is the trend when it comes to cost right now?
The trend of cost is really a function of land availability,
mm-hmm.
right? There's just land that is land and location is the primary concern for building data centers. So you'll find areas where, again, geographic stability, connection to fiber networks, tax incentives, low utility costs exists. Those are prime places to build. Well, because they are, all data center providers want to be in those locations. So of course you see land prices increasing exponentially. At some point, those markets, like we see in Northern Virginia, get saturated. And we've seen DC clients pushing out to the outskirts, say, of Auburn, Virginia, and Loudoun counties. But there's just so far you can go before you get too far from the fiber and have to pull a bunch of cables, which exponentially increases the cost and makes it not viable from a financial standpoint. So then you go looking for other markets.
Mm-hmm. Well, Whitney, thank you for sharing your thoughts and your information about what's going on in the data center market. We're all linked now, so this is a topic for everybody's concern. And we'll keep an eye on future reports coming out of your company.
Hey, I appreciate it.
Yeah. Thanks to our audience for watching. This is John Caulfield from Building Design and Construction.